You see, there is something very curious happening right now. Those who have begun to wake up, those who have started to see through the game, are quietly disappearing. Not with speeches or noise, but simply stepping back, no longer interested in the usual performance. If you felt this yourself, if ordinary conversations, social events, and small performances have started to feel unbearable, what I'm about to say may ease you. This isn't a disorder. It isn't antisocial behavior. It's what naturally happens when a person wakes up. By waking up, I don't mean reading a few books on philosophy or having a nice idea about oneness. I mean that moment when you suddenly notice that most of what people are doing is sleepwalking. They move around as if on automatic, playing roles they didn't choose, repeating lines they didn't write. And when you're asleep yourself, this doesn't seem strange at all. You blend in, you talk about nothing and think it matters. You care about other people's opinions and believe they're important. You chase things with no real substance and call it success. But when the veil drops, everything shifts. It's like walking out of a dark cinema into daylight. You can try to go back and enjoy the film, but you can't anymore because you know it's just a projection. You've seen the screen for what it is. That's what's happening to people who are waking up now. They find they can't keep participating in the collective dream, not because they think they're better than anyone else, but because their system simply can't accept what it once believed. Society runs on an agreement, a shared decision to pretend the characters we play are who we are, to pretend that the opinions we've absorbed are personal truths, to pretend that all this rushing and seriousness is actually leading somewhere important. The whole play only works if everyone stays in character. But when someone wakes up, they stop playing. They forget the script. They look directly at the stage itself. And this makes others uncomfortable, because the awakened can see beneath the surface. They see the fear behind the confidence, the emptiness behind the busyness, the fact that most arguments aren't about what people think they're about at all. And so they step away, not out of rejection, but because they can no longer pretend the game is real. When someone shouts their outrage into the public square, the awakened person doesn't see an enemy. They see unconscious material looking for somewhere to land. When society splits itself into us and them, the awakened person understands that both sides are simply projections colliding with each other. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending it's serious business. You can't take sides with the same heat and certainty as before, because you know it's all just a way of avoiding the mirror. So what does one do in that position? You withdraw. Not because you've stopped caring, not because you hate people, but because staying in the game demands that you deny what you've come to understand. Every conversation asks you to act as if you haven't seen what you've seen. Every social situation expects you to wear an older version of yourself, a mask that no longer fits. And after enough time, something in you refuses. It simply says, stop. Stop pretending. Stop shrinking yourself just to keep up the act. Go where you can actually breathe. And let's be clear, this is not about avoiding life. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's not running away from the world because it's too hard. It's something much simpler and far more honest. It's the recognition that staying in unconscious environments slowly harms consciousness itself. It's like putting a living plant in a dark room. It might survive for a while, but eventually it withers. Being surrounded by people who are asleep isn't just uncomfortable, it's draining. You spend an enormous amount of energy holding your center while everything around you pulls you off balance. You filter out projections, resist getting swept into emotional currents, and keep your awareness clear while others drift in fog. And no one sees the work you're doing because it's invisible, but it's real, and it costs you energy. Eventually, you realize you're spending all your strength just trying to stay awake in places that keep pulling you back to sleep, and that's when the choice appears. You choose consciousness over belonging, truth over approval, your own clarity over the comfort of being accepted by those who can't yet see what you see. That's when the disappearing begins. The first thing to go is the noise. Social media, for example, becomes unbearable because you can feel its nature. It's a machine built to keep people unconscious. Scrolling, judging, comparing, getting outraged, getting distracted. If you're awake, it's like standing in a river of sewage. So you stop. You log out, you delete the apps, you stop feeding the machine. And without anyone noticing, hours of your life quietly return to you. Then you start leaving social circles, not with resentment, not with grand announcements. You simply stop showing up, because you begin to see that most social spaces are stages. People are performing their lives, performing success, performing confidence, performing happiness, performing their opinions, and you can no longer play that part. Your real self has emerged, and it has no interest in putting on a mask. Then you leave certain relationships, not because you suddenly stopped caring about people, but because many of those bonds were built on a version of you that no longer exists. The sleeping version. Once you've woken up, you find there's no shared language anymore. You're no longer living in the same world. They're still speaking from inside the dream, and you're no longer in it. Then comes the career. That's often the hardest part, because society has tied identity to work so tightly that leaving a job can feel like leaving yourself. But when you awaken, something changes. You can't play along with a system you can see through. You can't pretend to care about things that don't matter to you anymore. You can't sell your energy to roles that require you to stay unconscious. So, you leave. Sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, but you do leave. Because to stay would mean to slowly suffocate the very awareness you fought to bring into being. Now, here's the part most people misunderstand. They think disappearing from the noise means you'll end up isolated, lonely, depressed. But for someone who's awake, the opposite happens. In solitude, the loneliness ends. Because loneliness isn't about being without people, it's about being unseen among them. Aloneness is different. Aloneness is clarity. It's the space where you no longer have to twist yourself into a shape that fits. When the awakened person withdraws, they discover something most never realize. They were never truly with other people in the first place. Physical proximity is not connection. Real connection happens only when consciousness meets consciousness. And when you're awake in a room full of sleeping people, there's no one to meet. But in solitude, away from the noise and the endless performing, you finally meet yourself. Not the version you rehearsed for others, not the mask that was trained to fit into the world, but the living, breathing awareness behind all of that. And that isn't lonely, that is coming home. In that quiet space, you can finally hear your own thoughts without the static of 1,000 other voices. You can feel your own emotions without carrying everyone else's. You can discover what you actually want, what you actually believe, who you actually are. This is what I call the hermit phase. And it's not optional. It's essential. You cannot transform while clinging to every old connection and expectation. A caterpillar does not become a butterfly in the middle of a crowd. It withdraws, it cocoons, it goes silent for a while. And in the same way, awakening requires a period of retreat, not as escape, but as integration. This is when all the unconscious material you've carried for years finally has space to surface, to be seen and to be released. They are healing the damage that came from years of pretending to be someone they were not. They are gathering the strength to stand on their own ground, even when the rest of the world is still asleep. And this is no small task. It is much harder than staying unconscious. Because when you are awake, you lose the luxury of blame. You can no longer project your pain onto others. You can no longer hide from yourself in busyness, noise, or drama. Everything you've buried comes to the surface, and you must face it. No one can do that for you. But here's the strange, beautiful thing. Once you've walked through that darkness, once you've integrated what you've avoided, made peace with your shadow, and found what's real inside yourself, you stop depending on the world for your sense of reality. You stop needing approval. You stop begging for belonging. You no longer need the crowd to tell you who you are. You have something better. You found yourself. And from that place, if you choose to return to society, you return differently. Not to dive back into the noise, but to offer a quiet alternative. You become what I call a border dweller. Someone who stands with one foot in the sleeping world and one in the awakened. You are present, but not absorbed. Available, but not dependent. Engaged, but not entangled. Maybe you help those who are just beginning to stir. Maybe you create art that cuts through the surface and touches something real. Maybe you speak or write in ways that remind others of what they've forgotten. Or maybe you simply live your life so honestly that your very presence becomes a quiet question in the minds of others. Is there another way to be? But you never go back to the old game. You can't. Once you've tasted awareness, you can't return to sleep. Once you've felt your authentic self, you can't go back to performing a part. Once you've seen through the illusion, pretending becomes impossible. Now, some will say, isn't this selfish? Shouldn't we stay and try to wake everyone else up? Shouldn't we fight to fix the system from the inside? But here's the plain truth. You can't give what you don't have. If you haven't awakened fully yourself, if you haven't done the hard work of integrating your own shadow, then you're just another unconscious person trying to wake up other unconscious people. And that only spreads more confusion, no matter how noble your intentions. The most honest thing you can do for the world is to wake up yourself. Do the deep, uncomfortable work. Become genuinely conscious. And only then, from that steady ground, can you offer something real to those who are ready. And understand this. Most people aren't ready. Most don't want to wake up. They want the familiar dream, the roles, the comfort of the play. And that's their right. Your role is not to drag anyone out of their sleep. Your role is to wake up and to quietly make yourself available to those who are beginning to stir. That's why the awakened disappear, not out of bitterness or disdain, but because they need space to breathe, to live without having to constantly shrink themselves to make others comfortable. They find each other in quiet corners, in small circles away from the stage. They build small pockets of sanity in a world still lost in its performance. And this isn't abandonment, it's responsibility. The world doesn't need more people reinforcing the dream. It needs people who've walked through it, woken up, and found something real. It needs living examples of authenticity. So if you feel the pull to disappear, if the noise, the games, and the performances no longer hold your attention, if you can no longer find yourself in the crowd, then listen to that pull. That is not weakness. That is your soul asking for space to grow. Do not resist it. Do not feel guilty. Do not force yourself to stay where you no longer belong. Withdraw. Rest. Be alone without apology. This is not permanent. You will return, but when you do, you won't be the same. You will return whole, clear, real. Someone who can offer consciousness instead of more performance. Use that solitude wisely. Do the work. Face your own darkness. Find what's real inside you. Because what the world actually needs is not more noise, not more preaching, not more performance, but people who have actually awakened. The spiritually awake are disappearing because they must. Because consciousness cannot deepen in places built to keep people asleep. Because authenticity cannot survive in constant performance. Because truth can't be found in collective lies. So if you are one of them, let yourself go. Withdraw without shame. Disappear without apology. Stand alone without feeling alone. Trust that this is an old pattern, older than any religion or philosophy. The way every human being who has ever awakened has walked. The caterpillar must dissolve before it can fly. The seed must break before it becomes the tree. And the awakened person must step away from the crowd before they can offer something real to it. This is not the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of consciousness that isn't borrowed from anyone else. The beginning of life lived from the center rather than from the script. And though the world may not understand it yet, it will. When it begins to stir, and when it does, people like you will already be there. Not as saviors, not as saints, but as quiet beacons. Pioneers. Carriers of something real. And that is enough.